Welcome to the Sheffield Sunday as Bill sees it meeting. This is a main share meeting, and today it is with great pleasure and much gratitude that we welcome Jimmy A. from New Jersey, who's come to share for about 40 minutes, after which we'll open up for general sharing, or if you would like to ask Jimmy a question. Jimmy, thank you so much for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Scott. All right, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are right now. My name is Jimmy. I am an alcoholic. Grateful to be alive and sober. And it's always been customary to give you my vital statistics. I have a home group in New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore. It's called the Design for Living Group. I have a sponsor, a service sponsor, a whole bunch of guys. But most importantly, I've been sober since my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was on March 28th, 1987. So extremely grateful for this way of life and to be here today. Thank you, Young, for the invite. I got to be honest with everyone. This is, I haven't spoken on a Zoom meeting in a while. It's like I went from 100 miles an hour to one. And in New Jersey and where I'm from, there's a lot of in-person stuff going on, a lot of conferences I've been doing. And so I really feel like this is the first time I spoke on Zoom. It's kind of a little weird to me right now, but we'll settle in and talk about my great humility that I have today. And but I was thinking I wanted to start off with tradition 12, the long form. Okay. The long form says, and finally, we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the principle of anonymity has an immense spiritual significance. It reminds us that we are to place principles before personalities, that we are actual to practice a genuine humility. This to the end that our great blessings may never spoil us, that we shall forever live in thankful contemplation of Him who presides over us all. And I'm sure there's thousands of meetings today where a speaker like me or one of you guys will say, but for the grace of God, I am sober today. And how true that is, right? Because this principle of anonymity, or if you like, the spiritual substance of anonymity, is all about sacrifice. And what do I sacrifice? Whether I'm practicing the traditions or whether I'm living these steps or, living this way of life, or as my home group is called, a design for living, what I'm really sacrificing are the personal desires that drive me, right? And what are those desires? Well, on any occasion, it could be anything. It could be money. It could be property. It could be prestige. It could be control, desires, or I could put it in two simple words, playing God, right? And so the real heart of 12-step recovery is I got to quit playing God. Why? It doesn't work, right? So this complete freedom from me, as the reading says, and all the things that drive me is to practice some sort of humility in my life, right? And when I was confronted with that word humility early on, I had no idea what humility meant, none at all. I like to think I'm a little educated, but for some reason, humility, I'm mixing it up. I really did not have no idea. And I picked this reading out because I had a moment way back in the days, like 1990 or something, where my sponsor was talking to me about this idea of practicing some sort of humility in your life. And, I was just confused. Now, I could have gone to a dictionary, got the definition, and, okay, that's what it means, right? But I was in a meeting one night, and I was walking past a literature table, and this literature table had a lot of grapevines on it. And what caught my eye was the word humility on the cover of this 1961 grapevine that was on this table. And I picked it up, and what we read today was what was in that article, right? That perfect humility would be a full willingness at all times and all places to find or seek the will of God. And as my sponsor would always say to me, how you doing with that, Jimmy? Not good, right? What an order. I can't go through with it. So what is the pathway? What was the pathway? How did I come to a place where I have tried to, in the last 37 years of my sobriety, try to practice some sort of humility in my life, knowing that I'll never hit the mark 100%, right? But it started with the process of breaking down Jimmy. It was started with the process of looking at my life in Alcoholics Anonymous and my life outside of AA. I'm a guy who, at 5 years without a drink in my system, I'm under this delusion that abstinence is a solution to a spiritual malady. That just not drinking is going to solve my problems. But at 5 years without a drink, I'm dying in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm dying because I don't understand what I'm really up against. Now that might sound ridiculous to some of you, and if you know, I hope I just didn't shatter your hope. But the truth of the matter is, I'm just not drinking, going to meetings, and not changing. Right? At this time, I'm about 32 years old. I got a belly filled with fear. I got a belly filled with anger. I got a belly filled with secrets. I got all the things that I had when I was 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old. Nothing's changed. I'm just not drinking. And I'm dying of this thing called untreated alcoholism. And I was confronted at a meeting by a gentleman after speaking on step 2 and basically lying to every one of you because I'm paralyzed. What would you think of me? So, I read the 12 and 12. I could throw some good lines out. I could tell you a few jokes, At the end of the line, everyone's shaking my hand. At the end of the line, this guy walks up to me. I'm 6'4". You might not know that in this little box, but he was 6'4", and he looks at me eyeball to eyeball and just says to me, "You're screwed," but a little bit saltier language. And I want to knock this guy out in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because, see, I don't know how to face resistance without resistance. I don't know how to face confrontation without violence. I'm violent by nature. So, I want to start a fight in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because this guy is calling me out. But again, for the grace of God, I step back and I look at this gentleman in his eyes and I say, "You're right. I need help." And I find myself that next afternoon in a railroad room apartment. And I don't know if you know what that is, but we don't need to go into that. But I'm on the Jersey side of the Hudson River. I'm overlooking New York City from Jersey. And this guy is giving me the spiritual test. Now, I've told this story 1,000,001 times, but, he's asking me a few questions. First question he asked me, he says, "Jimmy, how long can you hold your breath? How long can you hold your breath? How long can you be in a 12-step program and not work the 12 steps? What makes you alcoholic?" And the best I could stammer out of my mouth in that moment was, I drank too much. I had no idea about the physical allergy. I had no idea about the mental obsession. And I had no idea about this search engine inside of me that's seeking all this stuff out, the spiritual malady. He looks at me and says, "What's your relationship with God look like?" And the best thing I can come up with is, well, I'm a Catholic. I believe in God, but what does God have to do with this? Then he asked me a question that many of you might not believe, but this is how it was in my neighborhood in the 80s in AA. He said, "Where's your big book?" And I looked at him and I said, "What's a big book?" Now, I'm sure there was one at a podium. I'm sure there was one on a literature table, but we were never encouraged where I came from to read that book. It was all about speaker meetings back then and discussion meetings and maybe the 12 and 12. And then he asked me, or he gave me a consideration. He goes, "Jimmy, if AA works, why do you have so many problems?" Well, the truth of the matter is, I'm not working AA. I'm not living in the steps. I'm not living in the sunlight of the spirit. I'm just not drinking. I've fallen for that delusion that abstinence is the solution to everything. So nothing's changing if nothing changes. But what that day started was the process of trying to uncover, discover, and discard the things in my life that are blocking me from God and certainly blocking me from you, right? And what happened on this particular day, this guy drove me so far or painted me so far into the corner, I had no other choice but to take one of those two alternatives: spiritual life, spiritual death. But you see, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm sober 5 years at this moment. And I can't, and I don't know what's wrong with me. And what happened on this particular day, this guy sat me down at a kitchen table and I started the process of recovery. 5 years into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, an active member of a home group, making coffee, setting up, breaking down, doing all the things we do in our home groups. But I'm just not changing, right? First thing he told me was, "Jimmy, there's two goals in Alcoholics Anonymous, two goals that I believe kind of to this today. The first goal is the obvious one. Don't pick up the first drink. But the second goal is the goal we all want to attain, and that's to step into the sunlight of the spirit, right? To get to that place. And you guys know that place if you've been there, right? It's an elusive place. We can go in the light, we come out of the light, but it's that place where we experience all the promises that are in our literature. It's a place where the bondage of self gets removed. It's a place where I experience real freedom from me. It's a place where, as Bill Wilson would call it, the perfect place, utopia, right? But see, to get to that place, a price has to be paid. And it's the destruction of self-centeredness, right? So it's the process of walking into the darkness of my life. Now, I've read this thing about 1,000,001 times, but it comes out of daily reflections. And it really gives me an example of what I need to do to get free. It says, it's the side of myself that I refuse to look at that rules me. I must be willing to look at the dark side in order to heal my mind and my heart, because that's the road to freedom. I must walk into darkness to find the light, and walk into fear to find peace. And the way the old timers used to say that in my neighborhood was like, Jimmy, AA is like a big bonfire. A lot of people are walking around the fire on the fringes of the fellowship, right? But if you really want to change, if you really want to have an experience with God, you need to walk through that fire and get your ass burnt and feel the uncomfortability of change, right? But there's one thing I can't do for anyone on this call today. None of you guys could do for me, and none of you could do for each other. And that's put willingness in your heart. Willingness is an inside job. And what makes us willing? Well, good whooped ass, as our good friend Ralph likes to say, right? Circumstances, being sick and tired of being sick and tired. Maybe being sober with double-digit sobriety, and just it's on me every day. I don't know what that thing is on me every day, right? So this willingness to walk into the darkness and to do probably the most important thing we'll ever do in recovery is to bring the walls down and to be vulnerable, which I thought was a weakness at one time, but it's really strength in disguise, is to be vulnerable to another human being, AKA a sponsor, right? To share my life, to get down to the common manifestations of living a life on self-will and seeing that stuff for the first time in my life. Now, if you look at the definition of perfect humility out of a Webster's or Chat GPT or whatever you like to look up when you're looking up words, perfect humility involves a complete and sincere acknowledgement of one's own limitations, strengths, and values. I had to get down to causes and conditions. I had to get down to who Jimmy really was. And like many of us, I don't know who I am. I have painted this, I've created a stage character, right? And I've been living that stage character for many years before I got into AA, and certainly when I got into AA, because God forbid you find out about Jimmy. God forbid you really find out what kind of guy I am. God forbid you find out that I'm a guy with character flaws and I make mistakes. I live up to this value or this perfection that is unattainable, but I don't know why I'm like that, right? So, this idea of getting into the sunlight of the spirit, a perfect example is here in New Jersey today. It's a beautiful 85 degrees sunny, as we call New Jersey. Today's a beach day. If you want to go to the beach, today's the day, right? But in order to go to the beach, and like I've sat at my kitchen table downstairs with many men, I talk about that goal, the goal of getting out that door into the sunlight of the spirit. But in order to get out that glass door at the end of my hallway, I need to walk through the hallway of life, and I need to uncover, discover, and discard the things that are blocking me from God and certainly blocking me from you. So I need to be vulnerable. I need to get down to the common manifestations of living my life on self-will, which really is all about the anger and rage that I have inside of me, the stuff that has not changed since I've been 8 years old, right? It's about getting down to the fears that drive my life, the evil and corroding thread, the stuff that just dictates everything I do. Fear is a powerful drug. And I had to get down to that. The other thing I had to start looking at was, the harms that I've caused, not only sexually, but financially, emotionally, physically. I had to get down to a lot of those things. Along the lines of those things, I had to look at some stuff in my life that I was really, I was trying to push under the rug without looking at. I come from a place, I come from a family, I come from a home, like, let's not talk about that stuff. Let's just sweep it under the rug and make believe it's not alive, right? But, my last 19 months before I got into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was living on the streets of northern New Jersey and lower Manhattan and New York City. I mean, being homeless was really a traumatic event for me. It almost killed me. You know, and I'm not going to go into all that, but when we talk about pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization, you get the idea. And if you don't know what that means, AKA hell, I was living in a hell that I didn't even know that existed, right? And I introduced my parents to a way of life that they never even knew existed, right? So getting down to a lot of the trauma of that stuff, you know, looking at that stuff with the help of a sponsor, you know, the unhealthy dependencies I put on you, right? I put on women, I put on everyone to make this thing, to make me feel better, right? How can I practice any sort of humility when I need your approval for everything, right? And then I had to look at these unreal expectations I live with. I expect Young to be on this call at 7:45 New Jersey time, but he came on, you know, 10 minutes later. Now I'm pissed off at him for some reason, right? I mean, that sounds ludicrous, but the truth of the matter is, how many unreal expectations do I put on people that I care about all the time, right? Thinking that they're going to live up to my values or live up to my way of life, right? So this whole idea of walking into the darkness of my life, you know, to get free, to look at this stuff so I could have a perfect relationship. Well, I shouldn't say perfect, but a relationship with a power greater than myself, to try to practice this idea of humility, to carry the vision of God's will into all my activities. Like, what an order again. How can I do that? You know, so living in the light, you know, I get to practice or try to practice this perfect humility. But I love what the reading says. You know, I mean, it gives us kind of a, you know, a little, I need not be dismayed because I shall never attain it, nor need I swell with presumption that one of these days its virtue shall be mine. You know, Bill's 36 years sober at this point when he's writing this, you know, about the same time I'm sober now, right? That I'm not going to do this perfectly, right? None of us are, right? And I hate this line sometimes because it sounds like a cop out sometimes, with spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection, right? But my sponsor puts it perfectly all the time. You know, we're all human beings on a spiritual walk. And sometimes we're going to lose focus of the spiritual walk. And sometimes, you know, life becomes life and mistakes we make. And, you know, sometimes I fall off the bike, right? And the idea is to get back on the bike, get back on the bike. And some days I fall off the bike once, twice, three times. And there's other days where I fall off the bike 100 times. But the willingness to get back on the bike and to strive for these perfect ideals that I think are really important in my life. And, you know, when I was asked, what are some guiding principles that I should be living by? Well, you know, the Oxford group is not Alcoholics Anonymous, but, you know, those four absolutes of honesty, purity, love, and unselfishness are really important. And, you know, and those are goals that I bring into prayer every morning. I prayed for that stuff this morning before I got on here, you know, and the idea is to walk out that door and to try to live up to those principles, you know, with God's help. But of course I'm going to fall short. Of course I'm going to, and that's not a cop out. I'm just going to make mistakes. I'm going to, you know, I'm going to run into people that, you know, push me in the wrong direction. I'm going to be in traffic. I'm going to be, you know, the beach is going to be packed today. I mean, there's going to be a little annoyances all day long, but it's the willingness to look at these things in a different light. You know, here's a real good inventory question for myself. Maybe this will help someone else, you know, and this really shows my agnosticism sometimes. I want God's help, but I want it on my terms, right? And how many of us fall into that trap? Especially when we get into the sixth step and the seventh step. You know, I think one of the biggest traps we have in Alcoholics Anonymous is that we fall prey to comfortability. And I won't speak for you guys, but I kind of know a lot of people, and I kind of think we're all the same way, built around the same thing, that we all fall into that comfortability at times, where all of a sudden those any lengths that we were making at one point just become, okay, I'll do it, you know, eventually I'll get around to it, you know, and all of a sudden my primary purpose is replaced by some of those desires I talked about, my chase for money, my chase for power, prestige, glory, right? Sometimes overtime becomes more important than going to a meeting. Sometimes, you know, coaching baseball or coaching basketball, that became really important in my life. Now, there's nothing wrong with that stuff, but it overtook my primary purpose. And as a result of that, you know, I started to balk on some things, right? And I love that paragraph that Bill writes and how it works. That some of these we balked, we thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us, I tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. So why is it that I can't let go sometimes? Why can't I strive for perfect humility? Because I'm holding on to something, right? Or I'm not willing to change something, or I'm too afraid to look at something, or I'm too afraid to share something with my sponsor because maybe there's a lot of shame attached to that. Most alcoholics have shame-based identities. I mean, I'm riddled with shame. I'm from here to the UK. I got a list of things that make me shameful, right? So why is it? What's that one word? Well, I believe this word kills more alcoholics than a resentment. That might be, sacrilegious saying that. That might be, controversial saying that. But I think my pride will kill me a lot faster than a resentment, right? And what does pride look like? Well, pride is the essence of my self-centeredness, right? And pride leads the whole procession of all my other character defects. And let me tell you something. I know for a fact, because I have fallen into this trap, pride will always step into place when I'm in spiritual stagnation. That just shows you how agnostic I could be at times. Well, here, God, here's the drink problem, but I'm going to handle this relationship. I'm going to handle my money. I'm going to handle my children or my grandchildren or whoever, whatever the case may be. I'm going to get back into the driver's seat. Now, when you even say that and you think of that definition of humility, those two highways don't crisscross. Spiritual growth and beating myself up are just two roads that don't intersect. So this idea of smashing my ego, smashing my pride, the things that are blocking me from God. It's a continuous thing, continuous. That's the importance of inventory. I can't stay sober on what I did 30 years ago. I can't, as my old sponsor would say, I can't stay full on a meal I ate last week. It's always a constant looking at Jimmy, pulling that spiritual mirror out, whether it's in a 10-step fashion on a spot check inventory. I write inventory every night. I share with all my sponsees. They share their inventory with me every night. I mean, we've been doing that for, I don't even know how many years, right? It's so important, as it says, to be open to others, to share really what the truth is, right? Because I could put that AA game face on like all of us can. Everything is fine. Everything's fine as the veins are popping out of my neck, right? So I go through the process of the steps numerous times. And one of the times that I went through was after blowing my life up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous at 10 years of sober. And what I did is something I'm not proud to say, but the truth of the matter is, it's my story. And my story is, at 10 years of sobriety, I walked out of my marriage into the arms of a woman in AA, and I blew up my life. Now, I'm that guy who's tried to build a beautiful spiritual structure up for me and my family, and I tear it down with a senseless series of sprees. And let me tell you something. You don't need to be drinking to blow your life up in Alcoholics Anonymous. Just sponsor a bunch of people. You'll find that out, right? But at 10 years sober, I blow up my life. At 13 years old, 13 years sober, I almost drank again. I walked into a bar one day, ordered a drink, said to the bartender, put it down. Felt I understood what Dr. Bob finally talked about, being stuck between a rock and a hard place. I didn't want that drink, but man, I needed that drink, right? And as I stared down that drink, all of a sudden a hand went around that drink and pulled that drink back from the bar. And when I looked up, the bartender just happened to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. What are you doing? Apparently throwing my life away. And what happened about 2 weeks later is I walked into a meeting. I found my new sponsor, even though he wasn't my sponsor in that moment. And for the next 17 years, this guy became my sponsor. But he took me through the process of the steps. And we say this quite often. I need to peel the onion back a little bit further. The longer we're in here, the longer we're down the road in sobriety. We got to look deeper and deeper and deeper. And what this gentleman did was he took me very deep into a lot of things. How many times do we say to a newcomer, are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol? And they shake their head like a bobblehead doll, and we never really explain what any length looks like, right? Well, how many times has our literature said to us, we beg you to lay aside, set aside your prejudices towards what? Well, they're talking about God and we agnostics, but really everything, right? What are the old ideas that drive me, right? And what this gentleman did was he took me through a process of really uncovering those old ideas, right? How many times does it say it in our literature? 22, 25 times. We beg you to lay aside your prejudice. So he really had me look at my life in a way that I had never looked at my life, my relationships, my family, my work, money, and especially Alcoholics Anonymous. And I started to look at things, and I saw how I was being so driven by self in all those areas, right? How can I practice any sort of humility when I'm being driven and driven and driven by me, really? And it really opened up my eyes to really seeing things in a different light. And I got to tell you, the two questions I had at the end of this little exercise he gave me, which is not in the big book, I guess he got it from sponsorship school, is, am I willing to live on terms other than my own? And where is God in all the other areas of my life? Yeah, don't take the drink away, but I'm going to handle my relationships. I'm going to handle my money. I'm going to handle my family, my work, whatever the case may be. And again, agnosticism all over the place. I came out of the 6th and 7th step that time, and he gave me a consideration, and I think this is one of the most important things that anyone ever said to me in Alcoholics Anonymous, because it really became an inventory, right? And anyone could do that right now. We could have group participation right now, right? So what he said to me was this. He said, Jimmy, do you look at the people in your life, the situations in your life, and the circumstances of your life through the lens of a character defect or through the eyes of God? Now, I'll say that very slowly, because if you want to practice any sort of humility in your life, you got to know the answer to this stuff. Do I look at the people in my life, my ex-wife, my wife, my kids, my neighbors, people in Alcoholics Anonymous, people I work with, family, whoever they are, the guy in traffic today, the guy at the grocery store? Do I look at those people with maybe anger or fear or jealousy or envy or whatever that character defect is? Do I look at the situations in my life? Maybe I have money problems. Maybe I have family problems. Maybe I have health issues. I mean, whatever that is, do I look at that stuff through the lens of my character defects or the things that have happened to me? I could give you a laundry list of things that have happened to me physically. I mean, I've had 41 surgeries in the last 20 years. I was in a horrific accident in 1999. I like to say I'm really 5'8", but after they put all the metal in me, I'm 6'4". It's a miracle how that happened. But truth of the matter is, like all of us on this call, stuff has happened. Stuff has happened. So how do I look at that stuff? Do I look at that stuff through the lens of a character defect? Or has the transformation taken place where now I'm sitting in the sunlight of the Spirit and I'm looking through it through the eyes of God? I'm looking at young with forgiveness and compassion and love. If love and tolerance is our code, I got to ask you a question. Is it? Do I really practice love and tolerance when I'm in my home group? Or am I the guy who's gossiping and judging everyone that's going on? See, that's really the shift. That's really the transformation of starting to look at things through the eyes of God. So the inventory we could all take right now is pick a person in your life. How am I looking at it? Is that person, that resentment, that fear, that jealousy I have right now in this moment driving my day? Beautiful 8:30 on a Sunday morning in New Jersey. Is that the stuff that's driving me right now? Is that person or those people, or that situation, right? Or can I start my day today with prayer, with meditation, with a real desire to seek and do God's will and try to forgive that person or be compassionate towards that person or give that person some love because that person needs some love? What does that look like today? Here's an opportunity to really grow. I love the last line of We Agnostics, that as we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. It's about getting rid of the stuff that's blocking me. See, spiritual warriors walk towards their pain. They don't avoid their pain, right? The pain we have is when we resist change. We have to change in order to get closer to God. I have to change in order to get closer to God. So this whole idea is creating a guiding principle like I talked about. and being willing to walk towards that guiding principle every day. And whatever that principle is, I used the four absolutes before, but just let's use one word. Is love my guiding principle for today? That I expect to go out today and love everyone I meet? That would be God's will, wouldn't it? To help his kids, that would be God's will, right? But what's it look like, 5 hours later after this talk, when life settles in, when I fall off the bike and all of a sudden I run into an old friend, or I run into a family member who maybe just rubs me the wrong way, and I can't let go of some stuff that went on in the past. So this whole thing of looking at life and people through the lens of God, or through the eyes of God, it's about stopping certain things and starting new things. And that's what steps 6 and 7 are really about, asking God to help me with these things that are objectionable, to be willing to change with his help, right? None of us do this perfectly, right? But we got to let God do the growing, right? But we got to take the actions. We have to get on the bike every day. And I got to pedal towards this thing called perfect humility, right? Because a guy like me has no choice. I've been to a lot of meetings lately, in-person meetings. I was at one Friday night where a guy sat two seats away from me and said, I'm 37. I just drank after 37 years of sobriety. And my hair, though I don't have any, stood straight up, because that's how many years I got. And again, I focus in on a guy like that, because how could you drink as an active member, or somewhat active member, after 37 years of sobriety? What happened? That's what I need to know. What happened? And really, when he unfolded his story, I could see him living life through the lens of a character defect, like many of us can, right? I've been looking at life through a lens of a character defect forever. So this whole transformation, why do we do all this stuff? Why do we do all this stuff? And that really brings me into step 7. And if you've been reading, if you guys read Daily Reflections, it's kind of weird. When you read Daily Reflections, the whole month of July is about humility and being humble, right? Just like, November is always about gratitude, right? But step 7, or humility, is always, the month of July. And, you read a lot of things in here throughout the day, but, and I'm not going to read you all this, but I just think of this one right here. For without some degree of humility, no alcoholic can stay sober at all. Man, that's we just dropped the mic. That's a drop the mic moment. You're not going to stay sober unless I try to practice this stuff. Without it, they cannot live to much useful purpose, or in adversity, be able to summon the faith that can meet any emergency. Everyone on this call will have their turn in a barrel, that you will have adversity in your life. And I say that as an old guy. I'm 66 years old, and I've been through a lot of adversity, whether it's money problems, whether it's, death in the family, whether it's health issues, work issues, family issues. I mean, you guys know all that stuff, right? None of us are immune to life, right? But how do I look at this stuff in life, right? I like to tell this story. I've been telling the story a lot, only because it just really happened in the last year. I was 18 months sober, and, like a lot of men, I had daddy issues, right? Like me and my old man, we just fought from day one. My dad was a drunk, he was crazy, and, violence and all that stuff. So that really set the tone for my life early on, so I'm a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, 10-year-old, and I'm riddled with fear already. I'm riddled with, insecurities and inadequacies, I come from a family. I come from a neighborhood. You don't talk about what's going on in your house. You don't talk about what's going on in your neighborhood. You internalize everything. You internalize your emotions, and you expect to live life with purpose with all these secrets. How's that going to happen? It's like walking on a high wire act, right? But what happened was, me and my old man would fight. And then I got sober. And all of a sudden, there was a little shift in my relationship with my father. He saw that I was hanging out with guys like you, and that things were getting better. I wasn't getting locked up. I wasn't living on the streets anymore. My life was getting better. And at 18 months of sobriety, I walked into my parents' home one night and one afternoon, and I found my father dead. He was 63 years old, heavy smoke. That's what really killed him. But he was dead on the floor, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, it didn't even look like him. All right. And so I'm kind of programmed, I call my sponsor right away. What do we do? And let's pray. Let's call 911. That's the emergency services in, the States. Uh, and I call up and he's praying, I'm crying, and I'm standing over my father. First cop shows up at my house and he's writing down the information. And he looks at me, he says, "Hey, I don't see you walking the streets anymore." And I said, "Yeah, I don't do that anymore." Taking a little bit more information down. He looks at me and says, "Matter of fact, I don't even see you drinking in the bars anymore." And I said, "Yeah, I don't do that either anymore." He goes, "How's that? How are you doing that?" And I started to talk about you guys. I started to talk about Alcoholics Anonymous and that I've been sober 18 months and I haven't thought about taking a drink until like really right now. And see, I come from an age when 12-step calls were very, common. You know, 3 nights a week we'd go out and grab a drunk out of a house and bring him to an AA meeting. So I knew the way that was done. So he's telling me about his drinking. And all of a sudden, I find myself 12-stepping this cop over my dead father's body. Right? So I tell you this story for a reason. Last year in my home group, I got a big home group, like 300 people in my home group on Sunday night. Tonight's my home group. I'm up at the front of the room talking with the guys about something, and I get a tap on my shoulder. And I turn around and this guy's looking at me and he looks kind of familiar. I don't know who he is. He goes, "I've been looking for you." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You probably don't remember me, but I'm the police officer that was sitting with you the day your dad died. And we both moved in different directions." He goes, "I've been looking for you for many years. And I just came here tonight to let you know that I just celebrated 34 years of sobriety. And I've been sober since I met you over your dead father's body, that I came to Alcoholics Anonymous the next day." Now, I don't say that because, as we all know, I don't have the power to get anyone sober, and I don't have the power to get anyone drunk. But God will use us without our permission, right? And as the old timers used to say in my neighborhood, if you think of a drink, reach for a drunk. If you think of a drink, reach for a drunk, right? It's our basic service that protects us from drinking again. I need a drunk not to drink. And so I tell you that because, this attainment or this goal, when I look at back then, the adversity of going through that and where I stand today, I wish I could tell you that, in the last 37 years, I've lived a perfect life, but that's ludicrous, right? None of us are going to do that. But it's the willingness to grow towards this God's will, the willingness to seek and do God's will on a daily basis, the willingness to bring this thing into all my affairs, to practice principles before personalities. I said that backwards. And to attain emotional sobriety. One of the great things I found out along the ways is that my happiness does not depend on people or circumstances, but my happiness depends upon my reliance upon God, right? And guess what? Nobody in my life has to change to be okay. I need to change. And I have been given a toolbox, a spiritual toolbox that's been laid at my feet. And if I apply these principles in all my affairs, if I try to practice the traditions in all my relationships, not only in my group, but also in my family and my friends and my relationship, all relationships. If I could try to bring this idea of unity into every aspect of my life and to sacrifice my own personal drives, my personal desires for being a number one guy, all that crap that we all try to attain. If I could just set aside everything I think I know about that stuff, it's really amazing how your life can become in Alcoholics Anonymous, even with the adversities. This last line in that reading reminds me of an old sponsor I had. It's funny when you're young in sobriety and you listen to the old timers and yeah, that's a great line. You just kind of laugh and chuckle at them, and then 20 years down the road, you're like, Jesus Christ, this is what he meant by that, right? It's like when I got involved with service, I'm a past delegate for my area, and I remember going to my sponsor when I first got elected as the area chairperson. I said to him, I told him what happened. He goes, "Oh yeah, Jimmy, just make sure you bring your recovery into your service work." And I said, "Thanks, Bob. That's a great line." Until I became an area chair, and I said, "Oh, now I know what he's talking about. I better bring my recovery into my service work." But this last line, As I thus get down to my right size and stature, my self-concern and importance becomes amusing. I think of this guy, Artie B. He just died last year, 57 years sobriety. And he used to say to me all this time, Jimmy, stay small and stay grateful. Stay small and stay grateful. And I remember him telling me that. And I'm like, yeah, thanks, Artie. That's a great line. Man, when I look back now at that line, I think how important is that in order to attain some sort of humility in my life. Stay small. I'm not that important. I'm just another bozo on the bus, as we like to say, right? I'm just another guy in recovery, living one day at a time, trying to practice these principles in all my affair, trying to live up to that third step decision to help all God's kids, right? That's all I'm trying to do. But more importantly, stay grateful. Not every day is a feast. Not every day is a gala event. Some days are tough. Some days are hard, especially when we hit those adversity, that adversity. So remain grateful. I've been blessed with sobriety. We've all been blessed with sobriety. It's a beautiful Sunday. I'm looking forward to taking on this day. And by the time I put my head down at the end of the night, I thank God for another day sobriety. And I thank God for Alcoholics Anonymous. And I thank you guys for being here this morning. So that's all I have. Thank you.